Oftentimes, graphics cards will overheat due to overusage and possibly overclocking. You could liquid cool your graphics card, but that's generally really expensive to do and doesn't always yield the best results, especially if you're not too experienced with PC removals and installations. So, if you're interested in a good solution that's going to help cool your graphics card down and it's relatively cheap, only a few dollars to perform, and is not too difficult, stay tuned because I'm going to be teaching you just that. For this video, it's recommended that you have some isopropyl alcohol along with some tissues or toilet paper and a lint-free cloth, in addition to your thermal compound, an assortment of screwdrivers depending upon the size of your graphics card screws, and that should be all you need. So, in order to replace the thermal compound, the first thing you're going to want to do is identify which screws need to be removed on your graphics card. As you can see here, we're using a 7950 from AMD, so because this card is a Twin Frozr, it only requires these four to be removed for now. All of these extras are not actually required to be removed to replace the thermal compound. This is why it's highly recommended that you check which parts are required to be removed before you actually start the disassembly process, because it is different for every graphics card. You don't need to fully remove these types of screws. These are usually the ones that hold the CPU in. Sometimes there's a bracket that's kind of shaped like a square with lines coming off of it that connects it to these four screws. Either way, it's not completely necessary to totally remove the screws. Usually they'll stay on, sometimes they don't. Because this card doesn't have that many screws, what we're going to be using is we're just going to be setting the screws aside. However, if you are using a card that requires several screws to be removed, it's recommended you use a metal magnetic dish in order to hold them so you don't lose them. You can also take pictures before the assembly process so you know where things go if you're not too experienced with this. As you get the screws off, make sure that you hold the backside or set it down on a surface so it doesn't just fall off. Now, as you can see here, we've got this undone. If for some reason it starts to come off and it's not coming off on one side or on a corner or an edge, just make sure you get all the screws and don't force anything, because it's better to have trouble with it and to have to put it back together and start over than it is to have to get a new graphics card because you broke it. Now on this card, you're going to see the fan connection right here. What we're going to do is we're just going to disconnect this for now and just pull it straight off. And then we're going to work with this. Now it's kind of funny to me because all of these are actually just a heatsink. All of this isn't even necessary. This is the actual graphics card itself. So obviously you need it for cooling. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take our isopropyl alcohol and we're going to apply it to our tissue. I'm going to double up a little bit because it's a little bit of a thin tissue. And we're just going to go like this, and we're going to apply it. Now what you're going to do is you're going to rub on your graphics card. Now this thermal compound has been replaced previously about a week and a half ago, so it's not too necessary, but I'll just be doing it for the purposes of the video. You're just going to kind of go in a circular motion until you get it, as you can see here. Fold it over on itself and try again at the other side. And then now you're going to need to do that to the other surface that it applies to. As you start to get it off, you may notice that some of it goes around the GPU. This isn't entirely necessary to remove and can actually be helpful depending on whether or not your compound is conductive. So make sure that you're using a non-conductive compound if you're going to get any excess over, or if you're not too precise with this, because if it's a conductive compound, it can cause some issues. As you remove the graphics card compound, make sure you get it all around and make sure it's not really everywhere. As you can see here from this card, it's going to be extremely shiny and good looking as you get it off, and so that's what you really want to be aiming for. After you've gotten it off, it's recommended to use something like a lint-free rag or something akin to that, like a glasses wipe is what I'm using from Costco, or something like that, so you can just remove all the particles of tissue, because those can give you some heating issues and completely negate the effects of what you're trying to do here. Now that you've got this done, what you're going to do is you're now going to take your thermal compound and uncap it. Now, it may say like 18 uses or 12 uses on the bottle. On one of these, you can get at least 25 uses on it if you're using it correctly, because you only need to put a dab down because it's going to be torqued down. So what you're going to do is you're going to go onto the CPU and you're just going to put a tiny, tiny drop. About that much. Make sure you put it, it doesn't have to be like perfectly in the middle or anything, but make sure that it's at least somewhat close to the middle so that it spreads evenly. This right here, as you can see, is more than enough. It's probably about the size of my pinky nail, if not a bit smaller, and that should be more than enough thermal compound. Now you're just going to put your graphics card back together. What I like to do for this card is it's really simple. What you do is you make sure that you're lined up, so you see these pins, you just go like this, line them up with each other, make sure they slide in, the bottom two, and then just push the other two down and flip it down. And they will be held into place just by gravity right now, and then you go ahead and you tighten them in. Tighten them in just a few turns so that it goes in, and do so in a crisscross fashion, similar to as if you were changing a tire on a car. Just enough that it holds it in place at first, because you don't want to torque down on one side too much. This will lead to uneven spread of your thermal compound. Now that you've got all of them in, at least a little bit, you're going to go back to the one you started and do a few more turns until you get it. Now I typically like to do it in 3 passes, so I've put it in, then tighten it a little bit, and then completely get it tight on the last one. Now you don't have to really torque down on it or anything, but you just want to make sure that it's tight enough that it can't be easily turned. Most of the time, because it's just going to be sitting in your computer, there's not going to be too much stress, so you really don't need to worry about that too much. Just make sure that you've done that. Now, after we've got it all together, and depending on where your fan connector is, you can reconnect your graphics card fan. For me, I like to reconnect it afterwards, after it's all together, so I don't have to deal with the fan connector limiting things. If it's in an inconvenient spot, obviously you would want to do that first. And there you go, you've replaced the thermal compound on your graphics card, and now you're ready to get back to gaming again. If you like this video, please subscribe.